Once upon a time, a wealthy man's fiancé publicly humiliated his beloved childhood caretaker, and his shocking silence left everyone gasping. I still remember that day vividly. The Moyo estate was aglow with lights, buzzing with excitement as Moyo brought Amina home to meet his family. I stood in the corner of the living room, my hands slightly clenched, as I watched Moyo walk in with a stunning young woman whose eyes were sharp and cold. "Amina, I'm home!" He beamed, unable to hide his pride as he introduced her. "This is Amina, my fiancé." I smiled gently and stepped forward to greet them. "Hello, Amina. I'm Mama Zuri. I've cared for Moyo since he was a child." Amina raised an eyebrow, scrutinizing me from head to toe. I wore a simple dress, my silver hair neatly tied back, and my smile was warm yet hesitant in the face of her attitude. "So this is the person who took care of you?" Amina's voice was icy, laced with disdain. How pathetic. An old, poor woman like this is still hanging around your house. The room fell silent, and I could feel the weight of their gazes. I lowered my head slightly, hiding the pain in my eyes. Moyo let out an awkward chuckle and gently pulled Amina's hand. "Come on, don't joke like that." Amina shrugged, crossing her arms over her chest, her eyes indifferent. "I'm not joking. I'm just surprised a servant is treated like family. How strange." Aunt Kezia, an older relative, cleared her throat to break the tension. "Mama Zuri is not just a servant. She raised Moyo since he was a child." "Oh, really?" Amina smirked. "Then she must be quite good at earning everyone's loyalty here." Her words cut into me like a knife. I remained silent, not arguing back. I had spent my entire life caring for Moyo, never expecting anything in return, but now my presence felt like an inconvenience. "Dinner is ready. Let's go to the table," Moyo quickly said, trying to ease the atmosphere. We moved toward the dining room, where an elegant feast awaited us. I was about to follow when Amina suddenly spoke up. "Is she sitting at the table with us too?" The dining room fell silent again. I hesitated slightly. "Mama Zuri always has dinner with the family," Moyo replied, but there was hesitation in his voice. "Really?" I thought she was just a servant, not a family member. Amina raised an eyebrow. I said nothing, quietly taking a seat at the corner of the table. Asha, a young maid who had worked in the house for years, whispered to me, "Don't mind her, Mama Zuri." I gave a weak smile, but Amina's cruelty didn't stop there. Throughout dinner, Amina continued to make snide remarks. "It's so strange for an old servant to still be lingering in this house. Maybe because she doesn't know how to do anything other than freeload." Moyo looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "Actually, Mama Zuri is more than just a servant. She raised him like her own son." Aunt Kezia spoke up, clearly displeased with Amina's attitude. "How interesting. I thought Moyo was a decisive man, but it turns out he's easily swayed by things that aren't worth it." I silently endured, but the others at the table grew more uncomfortable. "Amina, you don't have to say that," Moyo gently reminded her, though he still wasn't firm. "Why not?" "I'm just speaking the truth." Asha clenched her fists. She had seen me dedicate my life to this household, and there was nothing about me that deserved such disrespect. "I think we should change the subject," Aunt Kezia said, clearly trying to control the situation, but Amina didn't care. She picked up her glass of red juice, took a sip, then suddenly swung her hand, causing the deep red liquid to spill straight onto my dress. "Oh, I didn't expect you to be so clumsy. Why do you still keep someone like this around, Moyo?"
The entire table froze. I trembled slightly, my hands tightening around the edge of my dress. Moyo looked at the scene before him, but still said nothing, his gaze flickering between me and Amina as if he was struggling internally, but couldn't decide whom to defend. Aunt Kezia set her knife down on her plate with a sharp clatter, her eyes cold as she looked at Amina. "You've gone too far, Amina." But Amina only let out a dry laugh. It was just an accident. No need for everyone to overreact. I didn't say a word. I simply stood up, bowed gently to the table, and walked out. "Mama Zuri." Asha hurried after me, but I shook my head slightly, signaling her not to say anything. Inside the dining room, a heavy silence filled the air. Moyo still said nothing, merely taking a sip of his juice. Aunt Kezia turned to her nephew, her voice serious. "Moyo, do you really think Amina is the right person for you? Someone who doesn't even know how to respect others?"
Moyo remained silent. For the first time that evening, he felt that something was wrong, but Amina's expression remained confident, as if she had done nothing wrong. Outside, I stood in the darkness of the vast garden, my eyes filled with sorrow. I had spent my whole life caring for Moyo, yet now I felt like a stranger in the very home I had devoted myself to. The night wind blew past, carrying a biting cold, but it was nothing compared to the loneliness constricting my heart. Dinner ended in suffocating tension. Moyo's relatives had all realized how cruel Amina was, but no one dared to say it outright because Moyo had yet to speak up. In the kitchen, I silently washed the juice stain from my dress, my hands trembling slightly. Asha stood beside me, unable to hide her anger. "You can't just stay silent like this, Mama Zuri." I shook my head, giving a weak smile. "My dear, how people choose to treat me is their decision, but how I choose to respond, that is what truly matters." Asha clenched her fists. "But you don't deserve to be treated like this. Moyo was terrible too. He didn't defend you at all." I remained silent. Yes, Moyo had been silent. "Why is everyone looking at me like I just did something awful?" Amina asked, feigning innocence. Aunt Kezia, who had always held deep respect for me, could no longer hide her frustration. "Because you were awful, Amina. You can't treat Mama Zuri like that. She's not just some stranger. She's the woman who raised Moyo." "Oh, how touching!" Amina let out a laugh. "But if she's really so important, why is she still just an old maid?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the living room. Moyo frowned but still said nothing. "Aren't you going to say anything, Moyo?" Aunt Kezia looked at her nephew, disappointment clear in her eyes. Moyo looked at Amina, then at his family members. "Come on, let's not make a big deal out of this. It's just a misunderstanding." Amina smirked in satisfaction, pleased that Moyo hadn't reprimanded her. I stepped out from the kitchen, intending to slip away quietly so as not to disturb anyone, but Amina wouldn't let me go so easily. "Oh, you're still here?" Everyone turned to look at me. I stopped in my tracks, my expression calm but burdened with sadness. I was just finishing up before heading to bed. Amina smirked. "It's strange that a servant can just go to sleep comfortably in this house. I thought you would have your own separate quarters somewhere, rather than taking up a room in this mansion." Aunt Kezia slammed her teacup down onto the table, no longer hiding her anger. "That's enough, Amina." But Amina still showed no remorse. "Just saying what I think? Is that so wrong?" I spoke softly, my voice steady but filled with pain. "Miss Amina, I have been here since Moyo was a child. To me, this place is home." Amina burst into laughter. Home? Do you really think so? An old maid still believing she's part of the family? I did not answer. I only bowed my head, but those who paid close attention could see my hands clutching the hem of my dress tightly. Moyo stood there, his gaze wavering. He said nothing in either defending me nor reprimanding Amina. In the end, it was Aunt Kezia who broke the silence. You should rethink your choices, Moyo. With that, she stood up and left the living room, her disappointment evident. My small room was located in a quiet corner of the estate, not far from where Moyo's childhood bedroom had been. I still kept old keepsakes, pictures of young Moyo, the toys he used to hold as he slept. I let out a long sigh. I had always loved Moyo as if he were my own son, but perhaps now I no longer had a place in his life. A gentle knock sounded on the door. Mama Zuri, it's me, Asha. I opened the door, and Asha stepped in, her face full of concern. Are you really going to stay silent forever? Don't you think this is unfair? I smiled faintly and placed a hand on Asha's shoulder. My dear, sometimes silence isn't about surrendering, it's about maturity. Asha bit her lip, clearly unhappy with that response. But you don't deserve to be treated like this. At the very least, Moyo should have spoken up for you. I said nothing. In my heart, Moyo's silence was what hurt the most. Meanwhile, in another part of the house, Moyo felt a vague discomfort. Everyone in the family was clearly displeased with Amina's behavior, but he didn't know what to do. Amina was lounging on the sofa, flipping through a fashion magazine. She glanced up when she saw Moyo. You look tense. Moyo sat down with a sigh. I just think things got a little out of hand yesterday. Out of hand? What do you mean? Amina raised an eyebrow. You could have been a bit kinder to Mama Zuri. Amina laughed and put the magazine down. Are you defending her? I'm not defending anyone. I just think you should have shown more respect. Amina crossed her arms and looked straight into Moyo's eyes. I was just expressing my thoughts. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe the problem isn't with me. It's with you. Moyo fell silent. He didn't know how to respond. At that moment, the living room door opened. Aunt Kezia entered, accompanied by me. Mama Zuri, are you all right? Aunt Kezia asked gently. I nodded, but it was clear to everyone that I looked more exhausted than usual. Aunt Kezia turned to Moyo. Do you really have nothing to say about all this? Moyo swallowed hard. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, waiting for him to speak, but before he could open his mouth, Amina spoke first. Do we really need to keep dragging this out? Let's not let something so trivial ruin the family atmosphere. Aunt Kezia looked straight at Amina. The issue isn't whether it's big or small. It's about how you treat others. Amina smirked but didn't reply. Moyo suddenly felt a heavy weight in his chest. He had grown so used to my kindness that he had never stopped to think that I too could be hurt. But by the time he realized it, perhaps it was already too late. A few days later, Moyo's family hosted a small party at the estate to introduce Amina to their close friends. That evening, the living room was bathed in the warm glow of golden lights. Crystal glasses shimmered on the dining table, and guests, including many of Moyo's longtime friends, engaged in lively conversation, all eager to learn more about his fiancée. As always, I remained in the background, quietly carrying out my duties. I helped the servants prepare the food and arrange the seating, but I never expected to become the center of attention in such a cruel way. Amina sat in the middle of the room, exuding confidence, her gaze scanning those around her with arrogant amusement. A group of Moyo's friends approached her, chatting enthusiastically. So, Moyo has finally decided to settle down. A man with curly hair and a white dress shirt laughed. Yes, but I must say I'm surprised he still keeps certain old things around in this house. Amina smirked, her eyes flicking toward me. The group fell silent for a brief moment, immediately understanding the implication. A blonde woman, Marissa, glanced at Moyo, waiting for his reaction, but as usual, Moyo merely smiled faintly and said nothing. "What do you mean by that, Amina?" Marissa asked, her tone slightly irritated. "Oh, it's nothing," Amina said with an exaggerated shrug. "I just find it odd that in a mansion like this there's still such an outdated servant hanging around." I heard her but did not react. I simply continued setting the table, my head lowered. But Asha, standing beside me, could no longer stay silent. "Mama Zuri is not just a servant," Amina let out a laugh. "Oh, really? Then what is she? A vintage decoration that just never got thrown out?" The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Many of them looked uncomfortable with Amina's words. A middle-aged man named Andrew shook his head and sighed. "Miss Amina, you're insulting a very respectable woman." "Insulting?" Amina raised an eyebrow. "I'm just stating the truth. A servant should know her place." Moyo, sitting beside Amina, was clearly uncomfortable, but as always, he said nothing. The party continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Moyo's family members, especially Aunt Kezia, made no attempt to hide their displeasure. She kept casting sharp glances at Moyo, silently urging him to speak up. But the worst was yet to come. "Mama Zuri, could you pour me some more juice?" Amina asked. I nodded and stepped forward. Just as I picked up the bottle, suddenly Amina yanked my hand sharply, causing the juice glass to spill all over my dress. The deep red liquid soaked into the fabric, leaving a stark stain. The entire room fell silent. "Oh my goodness!" Amina gasped theatrically. "How clumsy of you! How did you manage to spill juice all over yourself like that?" The entire table sat frozen. Some guests exchanged shocked glances, unable to believe what had just happened. I stood still, my hands trembling slightly, but I didn't say a word. "I'm sorry, I'll go change," I said. But Amina wasn't finished. She smirked and turned to Moyo. "Do you see this, Moyo? I honestly don't understand why you still keep her in this house. An old, clumsy woman like that only makes everything more of a mess." Moyo stiffened, his fingers tightening around his glass. But in the end, he still said nothing. Asha couldn't take it anymore. She shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "You've gone too far, Amina. You spilled that juice on Mama Zuri and now you're blaming her." Amina chuckled. "Is the little maid getting upset over the old woman? How touching." Asha made a move toward her, but I gently placed a hand on her arm and shook my head. "It's all right, Asha." Without another word, I turned and quietly left the dining table. Moyo watched me go, his lips pressed tightly together, a strange feeling swelling in his chest, a mixture of discomfort and shame. The other guests also felt uncomfortable. Aunt Kezia set her knife down on her plate with a sharp clatter, her voice firm and unwavering. "Amina, you've gone too far." Amina tilted her head with mock innocence. "I was merely stating the truth." Aunt Kezia stared at her, her gaze piercing. "No, that wasn't the truth, that was sheer disrespect." Amina shrugged, maintaining her smug expression. "If everyone wants to paint me as the villain, Go ahead. I simply don't like unnecessary things cluttering my life. Her words cut deep into everyone sitting in the room. Moyo could no longer ignore the discomfort gnawing at his conscience. For years, he had always considered me family, and yet tonight, when I was openly humiliated in front of him, he had done nothing. What was he thinking? Why had he remained silent? What's wrong? Amina stepped closer, draping her arm over Moyo's shoulder. Moyo turned to look at her. For the first time, he truly saw Amina, saw who she really was. Did you really have to do that? His voice was low. Do what? Amina raised an eyebrow. Humiliate Mama Zuri like that? Amina let out a laugh. Are you blaming me now? You never had a problem when I spoke about her before, so why are you suddenly feeling guilty? Moyo fell silent. She was right. He had been silent before, but why? Maybe it was because he had never realized that his silence could wound someone who mattered so much. He looked down at his hands. The same hands that I had once held when he was a child. The same hands I had taught to hold a pen, to tie his shoelaces. Suddenly, a deep, suffocating shame washed over him. But perhaps it was too late. After the party, the estate was shrouded in a heavy silence. The guests had all left, but the atmosphere had not returned to normal. My family members still whispered about what had happened. I had quietly retreated to my room after being humiliated in front of everyone. No one had seen me fight back, and no one had heard me complain. But my silence was what made those with a conscience feel the most guilt. Moyo sat alone in the living room, his eyes fixed on the glass of juice in his hands. Amina's words, the way she had treated me, all played vividly in his mind. But what unsettled him the most was himself, his own silence. The door creaked open. Aunt Kezia stepped inside, arms crossed, her expression stern as she looked at her nephew. What are you thinking, Moyo? Moyo looked up at her, exhaling a weary sigh as he set his glass down on the table. What are you talking about? Aunt Kezia sat down across from him, her voice cutting through the air like steel. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Amina spent the entire evening humiliating Mama Zuri without an ounce of restraint. Don't tell me you didn't notice. Moyo rubbed his temples, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Aunt Kezia, I know Amina was a little harsh, but maybe she just isn't used to the way things work around here. She didn't mean any harm. Aunt Kezia let out a dry laugh. Didn't mean any harm? Think what you want, but what disappoints me the most isn't Amina. It's you. Moyo frowned. Me? Yes, you sat there and watched Mama Zuri be degraded in front of everyone, and you didn't say a single word to defend her, the woman who dedicated her entire life to raising you. Aunt Kezia's voice grew sharper. I truly don't understand who you are, Moyo, because the boy I once knew would never stand by and allow such injustice to happen. Aunt Kezia's words cut through Moyo like a knife. He lowered his head, his hands clenched tightly. I just didn't want to cause tension. Didn't want to cause tension? Aunt Kezia shook her head in disappointment. Do you think your silence didn't cause harm? If Mama Zuri doesn't matter to you, then say it outright. But if she does, then you cannot treat her this way. Moyo didn't respond. He had no excuse. Mama Zuri didn't deserve to be treated like that. Moyo and Aunt Kezia turned toward the voice. Standing in the doorway was Andrew, a close friend of the family, a middle-aged man who had witnessed me raising Moyo since childhood. I saw everything that happened tonight. Andrew stepped forward, his expression serious. I know you, Moyo. You're not a heartless person, but you're letting Amina cloud your judgment. A heavy weight settled in Moyo's chest. He could no longer deny it. Moyo hesitated. If you keep staying silent, it won't just be Mama Zuri who gets hurt. You'll end up losing what matters most to you, Andrew said, then patted Moyo's shoulder before walking away. Aunt Kezia remained, her gaze filled with disappointment. Think carefully, Moyo. Don't wait until it's too late. With that, she turned and left, leaving Moyo alone in the vast room. For the first time, he realized that his choices could cost him something truly precious. I sat on my bed, looking down at the dark stain of juice still visible on my dress. I wasn't angry, just sad. I had spent my entire life caring for Moyo, yet tonight I had been humiliated in front of him and he had done nothing to stop it. Asha entered the room, carrying a fresh set of clothes. Here, change into this. I'll wash that dress for you. I smiled softly. Thank you, Asha. But Asha couldn't hide her frustration. Aren't you angry at Moyo for not standing up for you? I quietly folded my dress, then let out a long sigh. I'm not angry, but I am sad. Why don't you say something? Why don't you tell him to speak up? I stared into the distance, my voice calm but laced with sorrow. If a person doesn't realize what's right on their own, then no amount of words will change anything. Asha fell silent. She didn't know how to respond. She looked at me, her heart aching for the older woman. I had always been kind and selfless, but perhaps it was my silence that made Moyo feel the most guilt. The next morning, Moyo walked down to the dining room but didn't see me. "Where's Mama Zuri?" he asked one of the servants. "She woke up early and went to the garden, sir." Moyo nodded and stepped outside, following the familiar path to the garden where I was watering the flowers. Watching me from behind, Moyo felt something unfamiliar in his chest. It wasn't the usual sense of familiarity. It was something fragile, as if he didn't act soon, I would slip away from his life forever. He stepped closer, about to speak, but before he could, I spoke first. "Good morning, Moyo." My voice was as gentle as ever, as if nothing had happened. Moyo opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. In the end, all he could manage was a simple question. "Are you okay?" I turned to look at him, my eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "I'm fine, my boy." My smile was just as kind as it had always been, but deep within my gaze, Moyo could see that something had changed. I wasn't angry at him, but I no longer expected anything from him, and that hurt more than any scolding ever could. The sun had risen high, but Moyo still lay motionless on the bed, his head throbbing like a hammer pounding against his skull from drinking too much the night before. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the emptiness in his heart. The image of me leaving the banquet, my dress stained with spilled juice, kept replaying in his mind. He remembered Aunt Kezia's disappointed gaze, Andrew's bitter reproaches, and most of all, my gentle yet deeply wounded smile. He had been wrong, but he didn't know what to do to make things right. A soft knock on the door broke the silence. "Young master, are you awake?" Moyo recognized the voice of Kamau, the family's loyal butler. He took a deep breath before replying, "I'm awake." The door creaked open, and Kamau stepped inside, carrying a cup of hot coffee. He placed it on the bedside table and looked at Moyo with a serious expression. "Young master, if I may speak frankly, this estate has never felt this heavy before, and it's all because of what happened last night." Moyo propped himself up on his elbows, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I know, but I don't know what to do." Kamau stared at him for a long moment before letting out a sigh. You don't know what to do? Do you really not know, or do you just not want to face the truth? Moyo remained silent. Kamau continued, his voice deep and steady. Mama Zuri has cared for you since you were a child. She has spent her whole life sacrificing for you. Yet last night, in front of everyone, she was humiliated, and you did nothing to protect her.
A sharp, invisible blade cut through Moyo's heart. I didn't mean to, he murmured. Didn't mean to? Kamau raised an eyebrow. Then what would you call your silence? Carelessness or indifference? Moyo had no answer. Kamau studied him for a moment longer before shaking his head. If you don't do something soon, you will lose the most important person in your life, and there will be no way to undo it. With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Moyo alone with his chaotic thoughts. On the other side of the estate, I was tidying up my small room. Even though Asha had begged me to rest after what had happened the night before, I carried on with my work as usual. But today, everything felt heavier, not because my body was weaker, but because my heart was burdened. Asha stepped inside, carrying a tray of hot tea. Mama Zuri, you need to rest. I gave her a gentle smile. I'm fine, my dear. But Asha didn't believe me. She set the tray down and clenched her hands tightly. Aren't you angry? Aren't you hurt? Moyo didn't say a single word to defend you. The smile on my lips faltered slightly. Do you think I should be angry? Asha bit her lip. At the very least, you shouldn't forgive so easily. I looked at Asha, my eyes filled with understanding. People make mistakes, my dear, but what truly matters is whether they realize those mistakes or not. Asha lowered her head, feeling helpless. But what if he never realizes it? I let out a weary sigh. Then perhaps it's time for me to leave. Asha's eyes widened in shock. Leave? I nodded softly. I have spent my life caring for Moyo, but if I am no longer a part of his world, then I shouldn't stay. Asha clenched her fists, anger and sorrow welling up inside her on my behalf. She felt a discomfort spreading in her heart. For the first time in her life, her own home felt unfamiliar. She looked around. Everything was the same, the grand estate she had lived in since childhood. But now it felt empty. At that moment, Aunt Kezia stepped in. Are you looking for someone, Moyo? Moyo hesitated, then asked, Where is Mama Zuri? Aunt Kezia crossed her arms, her gaze stern. Do you really care? The question caught Moyo off guard. Of course I care, Aunt Kezia smirked. Then why didn't you say a word when she was humiliated last night? Moyo was at a loss for words. Aunt Kezia sighed. Mama Zuri is thinking about leaving. Moyo froze. Leaving? Yes. You've made her feel like she no longer has a place in this house. A heavy weight settled in Moyo's chest. I was leaving? I had been by his side throughout his childhood. I was the one who held his hand when he was sick, who stayed up through the night when he was afraid. And now I wanted to leave because of him? A strange fear crept into his heart, a fear that if he didn't act now, he would lose me forever. Without another word, Moyo rushed toward my room, but when he arrived, the door was shut. He hesitated, then knocked softly. Mama Zuri? No response. Moyo took a deep breath, then pushed the door open. The first thing he saw was a small suitcase neatly placed beside the bed, and at that moment, he knew he had gone too far. Moyo stood frozen, staring at the small suitcase. It sat neatly by the bed, an unmistakable sign I had truly decided to leave. His heart felt unbearably heavy. For the first time, he realized he might lose me forever. I slowly emerged from the corner of the room, a small cloth in my hand. I paused when I saw Moyo, but then simply gave him a gentle smile. "What are you doing here, Moyo?" My voice was as soft as always, but there was a distance in it that made his heart tighten. Moyo stared at the suitcase, then turned to me. "Are you really leaving?" I gently placed the cloth down on a chair before sitting beside the bed. "Perhaps it's time." A wave of fear washed over him. "You can't leave." I smiled, but my eyes were filled with sorrow. "Why not? This is no longer my home." Moyo clenched his fists. "What are you saying? This has always been your home." I shook my head, my voice heavy with sadness. "My dear boy, if this were truly my home, then I wouldn't feel so out of place." It felt like a punch to his chest. I felt like a stranger in the very house I had spent my life in. He looked at me, and for the first time, he noticed the deep lines on my face, not just from time, but from the pain he had unknowingly caused. Moyo pulled up a chair and sat in front of me. "You can't leave, Mama Zuri. You're my family." I smiled, but it lacked the warmth it once had. "Family?" I looked at him, my voice as light as a breeze. "Are you sure?" Moyo nodded immediately. "Of course. I grew up because of you. I love you like my own mother." I remained silent for a long time, then sighed softly. "If I were truly your family, then why were you silent last night?" Moyo froze. He had no answer. He could make excuses, say that he didn't want to create conflict, that he only wanted to keep the peace with Amina. But deep down, he knew there was no excuse that could justify his silence. I looked at him for a long time before gently shaking my head. "Do you know something, Moyo? It's not cruel words that hurt the most. It's silence." A bitter feeling rose in Moyo's chest. "Are you angry with me?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "I'm not angry, but I am disappointed." Those words hurt more than any reproach ever could. I wasn't angry because I no longer expected anything from him. Moyo felt his throat tighten. "Please don't go," he pleaded. I smiled kindly, reaching up to gently run my fingers through his hair, just as I used to when he was a child. "Moyo, you've grown up. You don't need me anymore." "No, that's not true." Moyo grasped my hand, his eyes filled with regret. "You are a part of my life. I can't imagine this house without you." I looked deep into his eyes. "Then why? Why did you let them treat me that way?" Moyo lowered his head, unable to answer. I didn't press him for a response. I simply withdrew my hand from his, then stood up. "I don't blame you, Moyo. I just think maybe it's time for me to leave." A wave of desperation washed over him. He had never imagined a day when I would leave him, but now, as he faced that reality, it felt as though he was losing a part of himself. He knew that if he let me go, he would never have the chance to make things right. Just then, Asha burst into the room, her face flushed with anger. "Mama Zuri, you can't leave. If you go, who will take care of Master Moyo?" I chuckled softly. "A grown man now, Asha. He can take care of himself." But Asha shook her head, her eyes burning with indignation. "No, he can't. If he could, he wouldn't have let you be hurt like this." Moyo flinched at her words. Asha had never spoken to him in such a tone before, but she wasn't wrong. He had let me be hurt. Asha turned to Moyo, her gaze sharp. "Master Moyo, if you truly care about Mama Zuri, then do something. If you don't, you will lose her forever." Her words rang like a bell in his mind.